Hey, what's going on? It's Blackson97 here, back with another deck profile. Today we'll be reviewing the P.U.N.K deck. It's a fun little archetype of psychic monsters, mostly tuners for their level 3s. Focusing on a lot of searching, swarming, and just sort of generalized synchro and extra deck plays. What's kind of cool about P.U.N.Ks is they don't really lock themselves into archetypes, kind of like adventurer tokens. They're meant to be sort of splashed into other archetypes, decks, and engines, but playing pure by themselves does actually yield some pretty good boards and boss monsters, so I figured I'd give them a shot just on their own. So without further ado, let's jump into the extra deck, focusing on their probably most well-known and pretty cool-looking boss monster, YuGiOh P.U.N.K, Amazing Dragon. It's a level 11 generic Sea Serpent Synchro. If it's Synchro summoned, target cards your opponent controls up to the number of level 3 psychic monsters with different names that you control, and also in your graveyard, bounce them back to the hand. Or you can target a P.U.N.K monster in your graveyard, except Amazing Dragon, special summon it. You can only use one Amazing Dragon effect per turn and only once that turn. But downside is you can only do one of the effects and one of them has to go off when he's Synchro summoned. It's optional, but that's the only time you can activate it, so it comes up to a bit of preference on what you want to do, but we are including a few other cards that can bounce cards back, so don't feel like you're stuck with the initial summoning bounce effect. Up next, we have 2 copies of their level 8 Synchro, Jam Dragon Drive. It requires a Psychic Tuner, but any sort of non-tuner monster. If it's special summoned by the effect of a P.U.N.K card, or just Synchro summon, pay 600 life points, take a level 3 Psychic from deck, and either add it to hand or Foolish Burial it. When your opponent activates an effect or card in response to your P.U.N.K card activation or effect, you can special summon Jam Dragon Drive from the graveyard. Graveyard effect is really nice. That definitely helps in bouncing up into your Amazing Dragon plays, but definitely a card just great in general, just for getting more searching on its own and just setting up that graveyard as well for when Amazing Dragon hits the field. Plus you have a lot of recovery and utility options, so you're never really out of resources even when a lot of stuff's in the grave. Up next, we have 2 copies of P.U.N.K, Dragon of the Ice Barrier. We're running a lot of level 3s here, so level 6 Synchros, level 9 Synchros, all of those are going to be extremely effective in getting our plays off. We do have a lot of variety, though, in levels, so obviously those level 11 and level 8 Synchros do come in handy as well. P.U.N.K's effect is you can discard any number of cards to the graveyard, target the same number of cards your opponent controls, return them to the hand. This is kind of the substitute for Amazing Dragon's bounce effect, so if you do want to use P.U.N.K's effect first and then immediately go into your Amazing Dragon, and then just kind of from there use that revival effect instead of the bounce, you can totally go through it that way. That's usually the play and route I go, is just use P.U.N.K for the bounce and then go into Amazing Dragon for the Monster Reborn. Up next, we have a copy of Coral Dragon. Generic Synchro Tuner monster. Once per turn, discard a card, then target and destroy a card your opponent controls. And then if the Synchro Summon card is sent from field to graveyard, draw a card. Really nice just removal effect, and then also some draw power immediately just to kind of reload that hand after you discard. Definitely goes well alongside P.U.N.K just to kind of reload your hand or just get pretty good field clearing. Up next, we have 1 copy of Psyframe Lord Omega. Pretty generic level 8 Synchro. Once during the main phase, quick effect, banish this card and a random card from your opponent's hand until the next standby phase. Once per turn, during your opponent's standby phase, you can target a banished card, return to the graveyard. And if this card is in the graveyard, you can target one other card in the graveyard, shuffle both into the deck. Really powerful level 8 Synchro. There's a reason it's still limited to 1. Definitely worth considering if you don't want to make Jam Dragon Drive or already have it in the graveyard, and you just want to keep messing with your opponent's hand or any other shenanigans. I mean, this is the reason a Pointer of the Red Lotus is also set to 1. To cap off our Synchros, we have Psychic End Punisher, another level 11 Synchro. This is kind of your alternative boss monster. Generic materials, but while your life points are less than your opponent's, this Synchro Summon card is unaffected by activated effects from your opponent. And then once per turn, pay 1,000 life points to target a monster you control and a card your opponent controls, banish them. What's also cool is the start of the battle phase, this card can gain attack equal to the difference in you and your opponent's life points. So obviously, P.U.N.K monsters have a lot of life point paying costs and effects, so definitely having something like Psychic End Punisher around is pretty awesome. Plus he gets to pay life points for himself, so you're always going to be running out of life points, which just so happens to come in handy in this case. For our fusions, punks do have a fusion. This is YuGiOh Punk Rising Carp. We're running 2 copies, but you can definitely run up to 3 if you like. You only use 2 punk monsters, but don't worry, you don't have to run polymerization. There is a punk monster that acts as a fusion spell for his archetype, but you can tribute summon this fusion, or you can tribute this fusion summon card, special up to 2 punk monsters with different names from hand or deck, but you cannot special summon level 8 monsters. If you synchro summon using this card's material, you can target 1 punk monster you control, make a second attack during the battle phase, which is pretty awesome. So if you use that in a level 3 tuner to go into Amazing Dragon, you've already got like a double attacking 3000 monster, which is pretty powerful. Definitely worth running on those. It kind of depends on your levels, but I find 2 Amazing Dragon and 2 Rising Carp to be pretty effective. Capping off our extra deck, we have a couple of Link monsters. 2 Phoenix, 1 Unicorn, and 1 Access Code Talker. The Nightmares have effects where you discard a card, then activate an effect, and then also have a passive effect depending on their co-linked. Phoenix lets you target and destroy a spell or trap and draw a card when it was co-linked. Nightmare Unicorn lets you spin back a card on the field and then draw a card if it was co-linked. And then also passively, co-linked monsters cannot be destroyed by battle as Phoenix is on the field. And then Unicorn lets you get a couple additional draws depending on the number of co-linked Nightmare monsters with different names. Access Code Talker is kind of, again, our alternate boss monster. Your opponent cannot activate cards or effects in response to this card's effect activation. If it's Link Summon, target a Link monster in the graveyard that was used as material. This card gains attack equal to that Link rating times 1,000. And then you get to banish a Link monster from face-up field or graveyard to destroy a card your opponent controls. You can use this effect as long as you're banishing different attributes. So if you want to include stuff like Nightmare Cerberus just to get that Earth attribute in there, you absolutely can, but for the most part, we're just using Unicorn, give access code plus 3,000 attack, and then swing in for 5k. We're already doing a lot of bouncing with stuff like P.U.N.K and Amazing Dragon, so our opponent's field is going to be pretty clean. Moving out to the main deck, we have 3 copies of Punk Xiamin, Punk Wagon, and Punk Madame Spider. They'll have similar sort of pay 600 life points and search effects. We're going to cover them all at once. Xiamin is our archetypal monster searcher. And also when it's sent to the graveyard, you can target a punk monster you control. It gains 600 attack. Wagon searches out our punk spells. But also if your opponent targets a punk monster for an attack or a card or activation effect, you get to quick effect, draw 1 card. Madame Spider's pretty cool. If you are the one targeting effects, or targeting your opponent's monster with effects, you get to target a monster they control and have its attack. What's kind of nice is if your opponent has stuff that can't be destroyed by card effects, or you weren't able to get enough resources to bounce it, you can just use an archetypal shrink and then smash into it with stuff like your Amazing Dragon. Moving on to the fusion support, we have Shirakusai. Pay 600 life points to fusion summon a punk fusion monster using cards from hand or field. During your opponent's turn, quick effect, pay 600 life points to immediately synchro summon using monsters you control. So what's really cool is you already have a Rising Carp. During your opponent's turn, you can use kind of like a IP Masquerania effect where you can just immediately go into an extra deck summon, or you can just pay the 600 life points to go into that fusion Carp himself and just go for additional plays from there. But Shirakusai is a pretty awesome card nonetheless. Definitely want to run 2 or 3 depending on how many Rising Carps you're running. Up next for their level 5, we got 2 copies of Punk Deer Note. Reveal 1 other Punk monster in your hand, special summon either the revealed monster or this card, and then send to graveyard the other one you didn't choose. You can target a Punk monster in your graveyard that isn't level 5, special summon it, but you can no longer special summon Deer Note for the rest of the turn. That's kind of the restrictions Punk have, is usually depending on the monster's level, there'll be some restriction based on that, or restriction based on just summoning the monster itself. That's kind of how the archetype tries to balance itself out, but what's nice is we can splash in other archetypes, we just got to be mindful of our levels. Moving on to their level 8, we have 2 copies of Foxy Tune and 2 Ogre Dance. Foxy Tune's a pretty pricey card for the archetype, so definitely want to max it out if you can afford it, but honestly, just at the very minimum, 1 copy is pretty sustainable. But again, depending on your budget, if you just pull 1 of them, just go with it. You're not forced to. It's the more copies you have, the better, but don't feel like you have to spend an arm and a leg or a spleen to get your full play set. Once per turn, when this card destroys an opponent's monster by battle, gain life points equal to its attack. We aren't really going to use that effect too much, just because, again, Psychic and Punisher's in the deck, but we're also just going to use Foxy Toon's other effects rather than just battling with it. You can tribute a Punk monster to special summon this card from hand, and then send this card from hand or field to the graveyard to send a card from hand to graveyard and special summon a Punk from deck. Ogre Dance kind of has a similar effect, but it'll gain attack equal to the original monster's attack when your opponent activates a monster effect. And then also you follow the same Foxy Toon effect, but you add the Punk monster from deck to hand. Hence why it's a little bit cheaper, rather than just the special summon. Up next, we have a few sort of tech cards outside of the archetype. We have 3 Psychic Tracker and 2 Rizbel the Star Adjuster. Psychic Tracker, if you have a non-tracker level 3 monster, special summon it from your hand. Just a nice little non-tuner level 3 that you can get out. A lot of the Punk level 3s are pretty much tuners, so if you are a little bit too clogged on your tuner monsters, throw in some trackers. It's a non-tuner level 3. Helps you go into Brionac or Coral Dragon. What's cool is if you use it for Synchro material, that Synchro monster can gain 600 attack. Rizbel's cool. Whenever it's special summon, target a monster you control, increase its level by up to 3. So a nice way to sort of manipulate your levels. Before Deer Note came out, this was the way we got into our level 8 Synchros. But regardless, we can pretty much manipulate any monster's level and kind of fine-tune what synchros we want to go into. Moving on to the spells, we have 2 copies of their field spell, Jam Extreme Session. Once per turn, banish a Punk monster from graveyard to special summon 1 from hand. And then when you pay life points to activate a Punk card effect, draw 1 card. You can use this effect up to twice per turn, which is pretty nice. So get yourself some draw power since we are going to be using a lot of our hand resources to go to the graveyard. Moving on to their continuous spells, we have Wild Picking and Crash Beat. Both kind of have similar protection and sort of destruction effects. So for Wild Picking, at the start of the damage step, if your Punk monster battles, destroy that monster. And also, when it's in your spell and trap zone is destroyed by opponent's card, activate this effect. Punk monsters cannot be destroyed by battle this turn. Crash Beat has the same sort of protection, but for card effects. And then when your opponent activates a card or effect that targets a Punk monster, target a card your opponent controls, destroy it. The amount you run for each of them can be a little bit varied. A lot of people just like to use the card effect protection just to kind of help out those Punk monsters. Since again, we also have Nightmare Unicorn for co-link. If you want to run more of a link build, you can do that just to kind of protect yourself from battle. But honestly, any amount works for you. It's probably an effective amount. There's no real right or wrong answer to it. Up next, we have 3 copies of Emergency Teleports, non-once per turn effect, which is really nice. And finally back to 3 from the ban list. Special summon a level 3 or lower Psychic from hand or deck. Banish it during the end phase. This is a great way to get out a lot of our playmakers and also get out Rizbel from the deck or hand, and then just start that level manipulation that we might need. Up next, we have 3 copies of Triple Tactics Talent. As you can tell, we're doing a lot of special summoning from deck, sending from deck to graveyard, adding from deck to hand. So you're going to get hand trapped like crazy. This is pretty much the prime time to bait it when you have a Triple Tactics Talent. Your opponent activates a monster effect during your main phase. Activate one of these effects. Pot of Greed, draw 2 cards. Change of Heart, take control of a monster your opponent controls until the end phase. Or, I believe it's the Forceful Sentry, look at your opponent's hand, choose 1 card from it, and shuffle it into the deck. What's cool about that Change of a Heart effect is on Triple Tactics, it does not target. So if your opponent does have a Dragoon, you can steal it. It will not target. So that's a nice way to get rid of your opponent's Dragoon or any sort of tower monster they have. Up next, we're running a bunch of 1-ofs for the spells. We're running 1 Raigeki, Harpy's Feather Duster, Monster Reborn, Card Destruction, and Terraforming. Raigeki destroys monsters, Harpy destroys spells and traps for our opponent. Monster Reborn just lets us revive some of those cards if we choose not to use like the Amazing Dragon revival effect, or if we want to get a Rizbel from grave and start that level manipulation. Card Destruction just unbricks our hand and loads up that graveyard. And then Terraforming gets us to that Jam Extreme Session for that draw power. Moving on to traps, we're running 3 copies of Nashawari Surprise. You can target a set card your opponent controls or a face-up card if you have a Punk monster, destroy it. Nice little form of disruption. We can also run, they have a trap called Dangerous Gabu, which kind of acts like an archetypal infinite impermanence, but we also gain life points equal to that negated monster's attack. I'm choosing not to run it because, again, this is the Psychic and Punisher variant, but you can definitely choose to run Dangerous Gabu if you so choose. Moving on to the side deck, we have a little bit of a Dragoon core. We have 1 Dark Magician, 1 Red Eyes Black Dragon, 3 Red Eyes Fusion, and finally the man himself, Red Eyes Dark Dragoon. Pretty much these are just our generic vanilla materials. Red Eyes Fusion lets us summon a fusion monster that lists a Red Eyes monster as material by using materials from hand or deck. And then its name becomes Red Eyes Black Dragon, but we aren't able to normal or special summon for the rest of the turn, but we can normal set. So pretty much if you do use it to get out your Dragoon, you're pretty much locked into just that, but you can still set up some of your spell and traps and set some of your cards, just kind of bait out your opponent if you do want to use like a triple tactics as well. But what's cool is Red Eyes Dark Dragoon cannot be destroyed or targeted by card effects. And then once per turn during the main phase, get to destroy a monster your opponent controls, but you can use it multiple times if you use multiple normal monsters for its fusion summon. What's cool about the fusion summon is you require Dark Magician and Red Eyes Black Dragon or a Dragon Effect monster. So if we do use Red Eyes Black Dragon, we get to destroy 2 cards during the main phase. What's also cool is Quick Effect. If your opponent activates a card or effect, you can discard a card to negate and destroy that activation and then gain 1,000 attack. So pretty powerful boss monster as well. Like I said, you're kind of open to interpretation on what sort of additional boss monsters you choose to run in the deck. What's great about Punks is, again, there's really no right or wrong answer. Since it's such a diverse deck and archetype, you can pretty much run a lot of pretty cool boss monsters to get your plays going. That'll do it for today's deck profile. Thank you all for watching so much. This is definitely one of my favorite and probably one of the decks I've been enjoying the most since Grand Creators. It's a lot of fun to splash into other Synchro or just sort of extra deck spamming decks. Definitely worth checking it out, especially take advantage of Emergency Teleport at 3. Get a lot of Psychics on the field and then go for your plays from there. But definitely a lot of fun. A lot of these cards are going down in price. I think Psychic and Punisher is a little bit cheaper. And Access Code is still a bit pricey, but it is set to be reprinted in Battles of Legend Crystal's Revenge this year. So we do have a chance for that price to dip as well. But Dragoon's the cheapest it's ever been thanks to those tins of this year. And a lot of your Punk cards, aside from stuff like Foxy Tune, aren't going to be horribly expensive. I think Deer Note is a little bit up there as well, but definitely choose your own adventure and run as many as you feel comfortable with. But regardless, this is a really fun deck. I urge everyone to research or at least check it out in some form. But that'll do it for today's deck profile. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you guys next time.